of that regional policy. And more recently, the Pacific Regional Education Framework approved by the ministers in 2018, and inclusive education is embedded within this regional education framework. So we are working strongly with the technical agencies to make sure that inclusive ed is part of this PECREF program. In 2009, there was quite a comprehensive survey in the education sector in the region that led to the development of the PEDF. And as I've mentioned, inclusive education was part of the cross-cutting themes of that program. Some of the challenges that were identified in terms of access, analysis of disability was one of the main challenges that was there in the region. And of course, the negative cultural attitudes of our Pacific people was also a major challenge. In terms of quality, the lack of trained teachers and inclusive education strategies, the lack of appropriate teacher equipment, the school environment needs to be modified for full accessibility. Curriculum and assessment procedures were not inclusive and very inflexible in terms of children with special needs. And policy and institutional frameworks, the lack of policy frameworks for the special needs population, and also in terms of data collection, the absence of data collection on persons with special needs and disability in the ministry's databases was quite evident way back in 2009. And the lack of early identification and intervention services, again, was a major challenge in our Pacific countries. So the development of the PEDF recommended certain strategies to be put in place within ministries of education to develop inclusive education. In terms of quality, one of the major strategies that was put in place was capacity building, mostly within the ministries of education and as well as at the school level. Capacity building was one of the main strategies at that point in time. In terms of efficiency and effectiveness, the recommendations for ministries of education was coordination structure at national level to be put in place, policy development for special needs, budget allocation for schools, TVET and community development in IE strategies, in-service education for classroom teachers, improving ministry databases for inclusion of children with data on children with special needs, paradigm shift from the charity and medical model to a more social and rights-based model. And of course, if ministries of education could consider scholarships for training with the regional within the region in special needs education. So those were the identified priorities and strategies under the predecessor of the PECREF. Now, bearing in mind these priorities and strategies, the challenges that have been identified, I think 20 or so years later, in 2021, there was a regional review of inclusive education in the Pacific. And it is interesting to note what were identified 20 years ago and where are we in terms of inclusive education. The review or the survey provided some quite interesting data on where we are now. So we are happy to recognize the efforts of UNICEF and also the Regional Inclusive Education Task Force that commissioned and did the survey. And we thank UNICEF for allowing the use of data or findings from that survey. So in terms of the status of inclusive education, legislation, policy, plan, standards within the countries of the region, I think we are doing well in terms of legislation on IE. We have about 40% of our countries have legislation on IE in place, and about less than 30% still don't have legislations on inclusive policy, on inclusive education. So maybe we need to focus on those 30 countries. In terms of policies on IE, again, all countries are in development or have policies on inclusive education in place. So we are happy that that has taken off. Implementation of plans, again, it's good progress in our countries. In terms of equitable financing and resources, we need a lot of work in this area. Most of the countries are kind of developing some kind of models of resourcing for inclusive education. Capacity of government and institutions, I think this is one area that we need to focus on. Building the awareness within governments and institutions on the importance of inclusive education in the development of the education of children. Competencies of standards of teachers and school leaders. PECREF has this as one of its major activities, so we look forward to the development in this area. In terms of the status of cross-sectoral coordination, this is an area that we need to build on in terms of developing cross-sectoral coordination within government, and also in terms of ministries of education and at the national levels, sub-national levels at the school level, and also the participation of organizations of persons with disabilities. We need to strengthen the partnership and participation of organizations of persons with disabilities. In terms of pre-service and in-service teacher training, if we can progress the slides, please. I know I have only 10 minutes, so I'm moving quite fast.
About out of time.
What's that? In terms of in-service training, we are happy to report that the survey found that all the countries are developing in-service training on inclusive education. So there's no red area in the slide on the right. So that means no country haven't got any in-service training on inclusive ed. But on the left, that's pre-service training of teachers. There's a bit of red in the circle. But of course, some of our countries don't have teacher training institutions, so that could be. So what we could say is we are doing well in terms of the training of our teachers. And again, the University of the South Pacific, which is our regional training institution, is working on integrating inclusive ed into all their teacher education programs. So that's quite a development that's supported by the PECREF. So hopefully once USP has managed to do that, then they can make it available to other national training institutions in the region for their own development. So teacher training and teacher in-service training is an important part of inclusive education if we really have to have quality inclusive education in our schools. Teacher aid skills, this is one of the areas that the region is really lacking in terms of, you see the red bars there show that greatly insufficient skills present in those areas, especially in Braille. Braille skills is quite lacking in the region. sign language also, and also in terms of augmentative, alternative communication skills. So you see the red bars are quite prominent in this slide. Inclusive practice in schools is the next slide. So at the various levels, you'll see that the prevalence of inclusive assessment practices is something that we really need to work on in the region, and the inflexibility of curriculum. But there are some good practices that are happening in some of the countries. So we would really like to, under the Pacific Regional Education Framework, to share these best practices across the region. So we're looking forward to sharing a lot of the best practices in inclusive practice in our schools. Accessibility and safety of schools. We see from the survey that school measures to address bullying, if you look at the final bars right to the right, you have a large, a very tall blue bar, which shows that in 9 of the countries surveyed, the number of participation from the countries was 15. All the 15 countries that participate in the PECREF participated in the survey. So in 9 of the countries surveyed, all the schools have measures to address bullying. So that is quite a good focus within the region, is to try and address bullying in the schools. And
Excuse me, Felipe,
oh, I'm on time.
you're approaching 15 minutes. If you could wind it up,
Oh,
please.
okay. I think this is the last or second last. Sorry. Yes, so that just shows where some of the safety and accessibility of schools. Yeah, and that just a consideration for the group in line with the evidence and recommendations of the regional review, which I'm sure Min Chao will talk about some of those recommendations. How can we ensure all PECREF implementation to be inclusive and not just to focus on those inclusive education activities? And maybe another one is how can we have a strong regional commitment to inclusive education and disability development? How can that translate to our countries at the national level? Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Felipe, for the great deal of information on the state of play. I will now turn to our 3 panelists, beginning with Master Celeste, who is Senior Education Officer for Special and Inclusive Education with the Ministry of Education, Heritage and Arts for the Government of Fiji. Master Deo, if you would please proceed.
Thank you. I can put on my slides.
Yes, just 1 minute or
Yeah,
1
thank you.
second. I will get to that.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. While we are getting ready with the slides, on behalf of the Government of Fiji, Ministry of Education, Heritage and Arts, I bring warm greetings from the Honorable Minister for Education, Honorable Madam Pramila Kumar, and the Permanent Secretary for Education, Dr. Angela Jokan. The warm greetings from the Ministry of Education. And we are very much privileged this afternoon to be part of this wonderful forum, the summit, to discuss and highlight the journey of inclusive education of Fiji. So with these words, thank you very much for providing this opportunity for us to share with you at this point in time. Can we have the next slide, please? I'll just throw some background information on inclusive education. From 1960 to 1967, students with disabilities were educated in primary school in Fiji. So that was our initial practice of inclusive education. Then between 1967 to 2010, all students were attending special schools. And then from 2011 to date, MEHA's inclusive education model, supported by access to quality education program, was launched and funded by Australian Aid. And currently we are also partnering with the Fiji Education Sector Program, the continuity of that program. Since 2017, inclusive education is one of the priority for Ministry of Education. Next slide, please. I will just discuss on the major achievements, and majority of the things has been discussed in the earlier presentation. So one of our major milestone achievement is the Fiji Education Management Information System, and that is the disability disaggregation, which captures the detailed information on a student with disability under the function disability tab in FEMIS dashboard. So how does this work? Using the above tab, we can generate information on the number of students with disabilities in a special school and in mainstream schools, number of students under respective disability types under specific disabilities. Then we can also determine the severity of educational needs, which is classified as mild, moderate, and extensive support. And also the data generated assist us in allocation and distribution of special and inclusive education grants. So in sum up, at the bottom, to date, we have 17 special schools with 918 students with disabilities and 1,378 students with disabilities identified in 385 mainstream schools. Next slide, please. Now the educational commitment through the initiative and towards moving towards inclusive education, our government and Ministry of Education is committed to free education grant, which is given to all students with disabilities in special and mainstream school. That is $250 per child. And for a student with special and inclusive education, an additional $500 is given per child for students with disabilities. So together with 250, we provide $500 per child per year. Together with that, we are providing free textbooks, bus fare assistance, and also the government has provided school buses to ease the accessibility, since we have issues regarding the public transportation of getting our students with physically challenged into the public transportation. So the government has provided them with these buses to pick and drop students from their home to school. Next slide, please. Now on the website, we have a website that provides information on the various areas at Ministry of Education, Heritage and Arts. So under the special and inclusive education tab, we have legal framework. You will find how our inclusive education is legally and the policies that guide us towards the inclusion. Toolkit from Toolkit for Disability Inclusive Education. These are one of our essential, very important toolkit that provides detailed information on inclusive education. Then we have FEMIS disability disaggregation, which captures the detailed information of student, and we, in a nutshell, we say student learning profile, which captures all the finer details of a child that has been identified and which is been filled by the school So the class teacher identifies and enters all the relevant information as per the SLP, student learning profile, and then we have a process that these identified students go through a process of verification to confirm whether we have actually the child is needing extra educational needs. So the head of schools then verifies that data. Then it goes to district education officers, which are the second layers of screening. They also verify whether the information provided by the school teachers, the head of schools, is correct or not. So finally, the special education unit of Ministry of Education get the final screening and verification done so that we can confirm whether the child is actually having some disabilities and or we could say the special educational needs. And then through that verification process, we are distributing the $500 per child. And on that website, we also have disability fact sheets. Next slide, please. And this fact sheet is capturing all the specific disability types. Way forward, how can we are working towards to provide the state of level ground? So the new dashboard that we are in currently in trying to upgrade our FEMIS, which will provide summarized data for the respective ministry departments to work effectively in decision making. We have strengthened our workforce, so we have now curriculum specialists in special and inclusive education who is responsible for providing guidance in terms of the curriculum should be inclusive. We are strengthening our policy, and which is currently under review, and we are taking a very deep consultation process so that every aspect is captured into the new reviewed policy so that we can provide and strengthen the gaps. Now, while we are speaking on this, we are very grateful that the Fiji education sector program, especially the facility known as Data Tech, is very much behind all these new approaches that we are at the moment capturing and the development that is surrounding the special and inclusive education movement in Fiji. So we are very glad that we are having a very strong support from them so that we are able to fulfill the sustainable development goal number 4, providing inclusive education, and then the accessibility and equity, and also the PEC-REF educational framework. So that is the way forward, and currently we are underway in a formation of technical working group that is consists of all the stakeholders that we think that they are part of our special and inclusive education family. And so together with that, then we are strengthening the workforce to assist in verification of identified students with special need and support them, which is also done by the facility. We are looking at to continue in the continuation of providing professional development for teachers who are already in service, and also we are networking with our TTIs to strengthen that they provide training, special and inclusive education training, so that they can produce teachers who are absorbed into the field of special and inclusive education. And the final one, I think, is the upgrading our FEMIS to strengthen data collection. Next slide, please.
Mr. Deo, you're just about out of time here.
Yeah, so that was the final presentation in terms of how Fiji is promoting inclusive education, and with the team from Fiji Special Education Unit together with our facility team. Thank you very much for listening, and giving us this time for us to present how we are progressing in terms of inclusive education in Akawaka level.
Thank you, Mr. Deo, for your presentation. Our next panelist is Ms. Mataafa Fa'atino Utumaku, General Manager of Nua Nua Olelfa, pardon me for butchering that, from Samoa. Please do go ahead.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to briefly share with you on behalf of the Disability Forum Board and Nua Nua Olelfa, the National Advocacy Organization of Persons with Disabilities, progresses and challenges in implementing inclusive education practices. And in saying that, I also acknowledge the support of the Samoa UN President Office for allowing me to use their conference facilities. Samoa continues to lead the way in implementing inclusive education processes. This is witnessed through the provision of teacher aids to support students in school, implementation of the National Inclusive Policy and Action Plan in the area of education, the signing of the MOU between disability service providers and the Ministry of Education, guaranteeing support in terms of finances and technical expertise to help them with their learning. Recently, to accommodate the restrictions of COVID-19, the ministry and Nua Nua Olelfa, as well as partners, are working progressively in implementing e-learning. At the DPO level, Nua Nua Olelfa and subgroups continue to advocate for the implementation of these frameworks through awareness raising programs, home and school visits. Sorry, I do not have a PowerPoint. Okay, so at the DPO level, Nua Nua Olelfa, which is the leading advocacy organization of persons with disabilities, together with subgroups, continue to advocate for the successful implementation of national frameworks through awareness raising programs, doing individualized support, home and school visits programs, as well as providing quality feedback to the Ministry of Education and its partners to ensure that the design of programs as well as their implementation are done in an inclusive manner. Nua Nua Olelfa also work with training providers and education providers to ensure that the educational needs of students with disabilities who drop out of schools are addressed. Those needs include Oh, I'm so sorry, my presentation continued to be interrupted. But anyway, Nua Nua Olelfa continues to work with training institutions to address the educational needs of students with disabilities who are dropped out of schools. Despite these successes, we believe that the concept of inclusive education is not fully translated into the system. This is witnessed through the lack of support given to students with disabilities in schools, and the fact that we identified from visits that students are often share more than one students who often share one teacher aide. Additionally, we discovered through our home and school visits to support families of students with disabilities in the from the impact of COVID-19, we discovered that 60% of students with disabilities we visited are not in school, either because there are no supports available or they reach a certain age, which is not covered for by the disability service providers support. With this, we came up with several recommendations. Recommendation 1, ensure that the Ministry of Education work with and consult with persons with disabilities through the organizations they represent in the design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of existing and newly developed educational inclusive programs. This is to ensure quality advice is provided and to accommodate the diverse needs of individuals with disabilities. Secondly, we call on the Ministry of Education to support, to mobilize, to invest in the mobilization of educational resources for the disability service providers. Thirdly, the Ministry of Education should invest in the provision of specialized trainings for teachers and teacher aides so that they are able to better support students with diverse disabilities. Fourthly, the Ministry of Education should enact a child protection policy to ensure that persons with disabilities are protected from all, are protected at all levels and are not discriminated in the school and out of the school environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your words to us today, and a lot to think about there. We now turn to our third panelist from UNICEF Pacific, Min Chao, and she has served at UNICEF Pacific for the last 3 years as education specialist. The floor is yours, Min Chao. See the presentation on the screen. Is Min Chao in the room in GPH or online?
Dr. Michelle, I think, can we ask the tech team, I think they're playing the wrong video here in this session instead of Min Chao's PowerPoint, UNICEF Pacific's PowerPoint.
Okay, yeah, I think what we're seeing online is different from what's being seen in the room.
Can that be, can the screen be shared again, please?
Erin, can you share the screen?
Okay, yes, I'm sorry, I thought it was being shared.
It was, and it disappeared. And is Min Chao there available to speak then? Sorry, I'm not hearing anything.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm very honored to represent UNICEF Pacific at this Pacific Satellite Summit. The panel the discussion on inclusive education. On the current efforts, can you please progress to the next slide, please? On the current efforts, UNICEF has been working closely with the regional task force on inclusive education to support the regional review on inclusive education with the engagement of 15 participating countries. You have just heard a few minutes ago an excellent overview of the situation on inclusive education by Felipe. UNICEF also support the revision and implementation of inclusive education policies and national disability policies in Pacific Island countries. We support the data collection on children with disabilities in EMIS, for example, in Vanuatu. Parenting support program, including a module on children with disabilities. COVID-19 communication messages for parents, including parents of children with disabilities. UNICEF has reoriented education funding and programming for an inclusive, accessible, and sustainable post-COVID, ensuring that education systems are resilient and have the capacity to adapt and attend to the learning needs of all children under all circumstances. UNICEF provides technical support on safe school protocols and learning support to enable schools to reopen and to stay open in ways that are safe and supportive for all learners. Collaborate with the regional inclusive education task force, which has recently had country membership elevated to the ministerial level in all regional initiatives related to inclusive education. Next slide, please. Before going forward for our current, like our coming commitment to influence the status of play, I would like to share some selected recommendation from the regional review on inclusive education conducted last year. First, inclusive education needs to address the inclusion of children disadvantaged by various factors, such as gender, disability, ethnicity, remoteness, and migration. However, increased and sustained efforts to meet the needs of learners with disabilities must be assured, given the fact that given the complex and compounding disadvantages and barriers faced by students with disabilities. And this calls for multi-sectoral efforts, particularly for early detection, early interventions, referral of services, which are often available through the ministries of health. Next slide, please. And another recommendation is on the inclusive education, requiring championing by education leaders and authorization by IE policy implementation plans that are resourced and monitored. Curricula must be accompanied by guidance to support teachers to adapt lessons and teaching approaches so that everyone can learn. Pre-service and in-service teachers training must be strengthened, particularly with inclusive pedagogy, going beyond just inclusive education as a standalone module. Next slide, please. Inclusive schools must be accessible, safe, and non-violent and effective learning environments for all. This includes also policies and implementation to address bullying and also gender-based violence, and standards to ensure schools are accessible, safe, and gender sensitive, with a focus on water, sanitation, and hygiene practices. Data collection and monitoring for inclusion in order to inform education sector planning, resource allocation, and monitoring. The last slide, please. Based on those recommendations and our current engagement, we are committed to further dissemination and support the utilization of the data and analysis from the regional review in collaboration with the regional partners and the countries in order to strengthen national policies, enhance pre-service and in-service training for teachers, and increase resource allocations for inclusive education in the Pacific Island countries. Improve inclusive quality early childhood education and learning, including in humanitarian situations. Improve inclusive quality and relevance of schooling and pathways, including in humanitarian situations. Support inclusion as core to all activities under PACREF, not only those specifically focused on inclusive education. Support the development and implementation of inclusive education policy. Coordinate with other partners to strengthen inclusive teaching and learning for all children. Strengthen education systems for inclusive education through improved data collection and utilization of data on children with disabilities in education sector planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Min Chao, for your presentation. We have only a couple of minutes left. If there are any questions, if you could make it a very brief question and put it in the chat, then everyone can see the question and we can see if there's an opportunity to answer. We will be dropped out of this breakout room and into a main room automatically at the end of the time, so we don't have any control over that. But if there are questions, if you could put them in the chat right now. But at the moment, thank you everyone for the words, and I'll just speak while people are putting questions in the chat until we see something there. Thank you everyone for the information shared, and I would note the commonalities across all of the speakers talking about the importance of inclusive education being a wide-ranging approach across teacher, in-service and pre-service training, across resourcing within school systems, across policy and legislation, and not limited only to a certain age group of individuals or people in school, that it ranges across, in fact, all parts of a person's life as a disabled person. So are there any questions, Erin, coming up in the chat?
Just one right
Okay,
now.
can we see it? I'm just I'm not seeing it on my.
From Anne Marie.
Okay, here we are. Is there a preferred framework to apply disability support in education settings across the Pacific? Perhaps maybe Felipe, did you want to address that one? Is there a preferred framework to apply disability support? Or any of our panelists want to weigh in on that question? Is there a preferred framework to apply disability support in education settings across the Pacific?
Hello.
Chair, oh, sorry, you can go.
Yeah, just to respond to the question, we have the Pacific Regional Inclusive Education Framework that has been endorsed by our ministers and also is one of the priorities of the forum leaders under the framework of Pacific regionalism. So that's the framework that we are all using to develop and support inclusive education in the region. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. Tino, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just referring to those. I was gonna refer to those frameworks as well, but also I was saying that the approach to inclusive education is not going to be a one-size-fits-all because of resource availability and everything that are,
Thank you for
because
that.
of the resources available in country.
Absolutely. I see we are going to be pushed back into the main room in several seconds. So thank you everyone for your participation, and especially to our speakers here this afternoon. And we'll see you all back in the main room.
Hello, Alex and Talon. Are you
Yeah, we're
taken
back,
back to the
Seta.
main room?
Yeah, we're back.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, and I must also acknowledge the excellent moderators and the panelists in our the concurrent or the breakout session we just had, the three of them, across the three different themes.
Everyone is back, Seta. You can restart.
Okay, thanks, Talon. I'm with you, right, Talon?
Yes.
Okay, Excellencies, distinguished participants, and I want to acknowledge also the wonderful moderators for the 3 breakout sessions, and indeed the panelists represented in each of them. I want to thank them on all our behalf. We are due for a break. In fact, we're actually overdue for the break for 10 minutes, but I'm just wondering whether 2:50. Could I, because we'll need to have our moderator, 3 moderators to report back on each of the 3 sessions. So I think they might need the 10 minutes to get those recommendations in consultation with the rapporteurs in the 3 different breakout sessions. Could I suggest we all come back at 3 p.m. Fiji time? So which means you still have 10 minutes, but we may have to shorten the reporting back period segment, or maybe the ensuing sessions. If that's okay with you, I'll suggest we break now, and for 10 minutes, we'll come back at 3 p.m. and then we'll revert to the 3 moderators for the reporting back from each of the concurrent session. Vinaka, and see you at 3 p.m. Fiji time.
With a disability
and I live in poverty,
my experience in discrimination is compounded.
Education me stop me from road from college school.
access to my community is so difficult for me.
Put and include me inside.
How is it okay to commit rape without punishment?
I have a name. Don't call me by my disability.
We have contributions to make.
Because Japanese. One house.
I am an athlete, and through sports, I travel.
I advocate for the rights of people with disability.
Through the business for me, support my community solely respect me. Inakile me from by you think me not strong.
I can live independently.
Me like a sing that all random. This promise stop crying out.
I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I'm a boss of my house.
I lead, I advocate, I won't let you stop us. Ensure women and girls with disabilities are included in all development efforts, so no one is left behind.
No one left behind.
Include us.
Include me.
Include me.
My name is Danny Maho. I'm from Malacca province in the Solomon Islands. I'm one of the girls with disability, and I'm work at YWCA Solomon Islands, and I'm happy to meet you. One of my friends, he got a disability. He got a wheelchair. He stayed nearby Big River at Matanico. When I see the heavy rain and when I see the people run down to the Matango River, and I wonder what is happening, then this is all quality and community what is taking them down the sea. I remember my friend, so I said to my mom, one of my friends, he is there, but I don't know whether their family is helping him or no.
We engage in the AHP coordination committee when they come up with their disaster preparedness designing programs, and some of the partners NGOs who are coming with that, make sure that when they go out and implement their activities, I can go with them to help them to see where the person with disability lives within their environments, for them to observe.
My friend is lucky, my friend is helped by his family. If not, already gone out to the city.
With a disability
and I live in poverty,
my experience in discrimination is compounded.
Education me, stop me from road from color school
access to my community is so difficult for me.
And include me inside.
How is it okay to commit rape without punishment?
I have a name. Don't call me by my disability.
We have contributions to make.
Because Japanese. One house.
I am an athlete, and through sports, I travel.
I advocate for the rights of people with disability.
Through the business for me, support my community solely respect me. Me from Bayutin Seminostrom.
I can live independently.
Me like a sing-singer that I'll random. This promise to cry out.
I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I'm a boss of my house.
I lead, I advocate, I won't let you stop us. Ensure women and girls with disabilities are included in all development efforts, so no one is left behind.
No one left behind.
Include us.
Include me.
Include me.
My name is Danny Maho. I'm from the province in the Solomon Islands. I'm one of the girls with disability, and I'm work at YWCA Solomon Islands, and I'm happy to meet you. One of my friends, he got a disability. He got a wheelchair. He stayed nearby Big River at Matanico. When I see the heavy rain and when I see the people run down to the Matango River, and I wonder what is happening, what 17 districts, all Kwahili and community waters taking them down the sea. I remember my friend, so I said to my mom, one of my friends, he is there, but I don't know whether their family is helping him or no.
We engage in the AHP coordination committee when they come up with